Hey guys, and welcome to this episode of Pizza Plus Coffee equals Code. You might remember the awesome game 20XX. Well, we're here with the folks from Batterystaple Games to talk about the sequel 30XX. Hey Chris, can you give a bit of a background, I guess, on who you are, what you do, and maybe a little bit about 30XX?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Chris from Battery Staple. I'm the creative director on 30XX, which is kind of like co-op roguelike Megaman X. So it's an action platformer roguelike that supports full multiplayer, either local or online. So you get that crisp action platforming that you're looking for from that sort of 90s era action platform, like a Mega Man X kind of game. Except it's all randomly generated every time you play it. So you're going to get fresh weapons, powers, bosses, all that good stuff every time you go through. And multiplayer, so you can enjoy it either with the buddy on the couch or a buddy online.
Uh, and it's a sequel to what I would call a hit game already with 20XX. How's 30XX different to its predecessor?
Oh my gosh, it's different in so many ways. So with 20XX, we developed it for about 5 years, start to finish, between day one of the project and when we finally shipped the versions on consoles in mid late 2018. But even after having made the game for 5 years or so, we still decided there was so much more that we wanted to do with the formula that it just sort of made sense for us to, instead of sort of incrementally changing the game and sort of continuing to develop 20XX for several more years, we thought it really just, there's so much more we wanted to do, including change the art style, that it really just made sense for us to shoot for a whole new title. So the first thing you'll notice if you see, trailers or screenshots of 30XX and you're familiar with the first game, we've really drastically changed the art style. We've gone from kind of a higher res sprite work style to a really high quality pixel art style, which we think just fits the game really well. We've doubled sort of the amount of content diversity in the game, so we've gone from sort of 4 unique stage types to 8. We've given our two main protagonists entirely different sort of toolkits this time. So in the first game, Ace and Nina are protagonists. They behave very differently at first because Ace's weapons are all melee and Nina's weapons are all ranged, sort of buster weapons. But they got the same set of boss powers over time, so by the end of the run, they would feel like they kind of had access to the same tools. This time around, both characters have different resource systems and different toolkits available. So Nina still has her 8 boss powers and her energy resource that she's managing, but she can combine any two of her powers together to sort of have awesome combo fusion effects for each of her abilities. So she kind of has 64 powers in a sense. And Ace's abilities are all sort of bound to the controller all at once. They're not combinable, but they're all sort of available to him via button combos. And he has a sort of rapidly regenerating style gauge. So he's not really doing the whole long-term resource management thing. Instead, he's just sort of weaving his special techniques in with his basic attacks and movement. So the characters control very differently. We mentioned the art style change. We mentioned the content change. We've just added a feature as of last week that we're calling Mega Mode, which basically takes the sort of traditional roguelike structure of the game and sort of turns it on its head a bit, where we remove permadeath entirely and make it so the levels will stay the same until you beat them. So when you start a Mega Mode run, we're going to generate the entire game up front. All of the levels, instead of being generated one by one, will be generated totally in advance before you play. And then as you enter each level, you'll have, a chance to get through it. But if you don't, any power-ups you found during that level will still be held by you. Any levels you've previously completed will still be completed. You'll still have those powers. So you can either try the same level you died on again, or you could maybe try a different level and sort of see if one of the other levels has a better match for your current toolkit, so you can maybe get a little more power somewhere else. So that's just a couple of sort of the big things that we're doing differently in 30XX. But really, we're sort of doing deeper systems changes across the board. So when you ask the question, how is the game different? It's kind of different, at least deeper in almost every way, except for things like basic game feel and controls and sort of the multiplayer capacity of the game, which are all things we feel pretty good about from 20XX and don't really want to change.
You talk about the art style, at least from if people are looking at trailers and stuff, that's sort of the biggest drastic change that
Right.
they'll notice.
It's
What
the one
drove
you'll
you guys?
immediately see.
Yeah, what drove you guys to head down that pixel aesthetic path?
We always knew, I always knew that this kind of game would fit really well with just very high quality pixel sprite work. And then in late 2018, we didn't necessarily intend to finish 20XX and immediately start making a sequel. But in late 2018, we saw Glauber Kataki, our art director for the game, on Twitter saying, "Hey, I have a few hours in my schedule for the next couple of months. Does anybody, have work for me to do?" And I said, "Yes, yes, me. God, yes, me." Glauber is the artist and animator from Rogue Legacy, from Chasm, from Duelist, just a super super gifted pixel artist and animator, and a fantastic guy to work with. And so we sort of started prototyping a couple of different things, and we eventually settled on, I think the 20XX sequel really just looks fantastic in this style, and we should really just move forward with it. And so we decided to move forward with the sequel because we found kind of the right artist for those changes.
And then if we're looking at the characters, Ace and Nina, you had a couple other characters as well in 20XX. Are we expecting potentially down the line some more characters coming into 30XX?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in 20XX, in addition to Nina and Ace, we also had two DLC characters, Hawk and Draco, and then a handful of sort of side characters that are all sort of hard mode versions of the other characters in the game that are kind of, they use very similar toolkits but with a couple of restrictions. So in 30XX, we handle character differences really differently, to use the same word too many times. So in the first game, the distance between characters to sort of have a new character that feels new and different enough is relatively low because in the first game, as I mentioned earlier, Nina and Ace feel very similar by the end of a run. So a character with sort of some basic new gimmicks, some basic new sort of driving force behind their build was sufficient. But this time around, because Nina and Ace are so different, before we add fully new characters a la, Draco and Hawk, it's really important to us that we make sure any new character feels sufficiently different from the other characters in the game. And so the sort of character depth this time around is a lot stronger than it was the first time around. And so we'd like to add characters. We plan on adding characters, but it may or may not happen before 1.0. That said, we really do want to continue to work on 30XX for quite some time after the game actually does fully release. Our dream here is that the game is doing well enough that it makes sense for us to continue to build content, add new stages, add new powers, items, weapons, all that good stuff for quite a while after we actually hit, quote unquote 1.0. And so we definitely want to build new characters. We're just not ready to promise it yet.
Yeah, it seems fair with just how different everybody is, and as you say, you got to make everything unique so they feel at least special in a way, or a reason to play that character.
Bingo. No matter how we release them, they've got to have a reason for existing. In particular, so Draco in 20XX actually has some of his kind of design philosophy applied to 30XX Ace. He's already so new Ace has kind of taken over part of Draco's whole game feel from the first game. And so Draco would have to change pretty drastically for him specifically to show up in 30XX. Hawk, on the other hand, a little bit easier to manage. We'd still have to figure out what to do with her powers. So Hawk's deal in the first game is that she has a couple of unique boss powers that only she has access to, but she also has access to the powers that the standard characters do, and especially with power fusion around this time, that as a basic concept gets a lot spicier, because the moment, let's say, for example, we give Hawk 4 new powers that are only for her. Does she also have access to Nina's power fusion? If she does, are we supporting a 12 by 12 matrix of powers all of a sudden? A couple of questions that are pretty hard to suss out and are definitely not at the top of our list right now.
You talk about the replayability as well with the random generation. Was that a primary goal of this game?
Yeah, absolutely. So we always knew, going back to 20XX, it was our first commercial project. We knew that we always wanted to be playing more Megaman ourselves, and so sort of a replayable kind of that game made a lot of sense to us. And at the same time, we knew there was something that we had to do for the first game to really sort of set ourselves apart from just a typical Mega Man game. We knew that we were amateurs. We knew that we were kind of learning all of this as we went along. And so we knew that there kind of had to be something different in the premise, in the sort of core offer there, to say, we're not trying to go toe to toe with the greats you remember from the 90s. But here's sort of this thing we're doing differently, and so hopefully that is fun for you. And so those are kind of the two big driving forces behind making it replayable. I personally just love replayable games in general. I love roguelikes. I love anything that can throw sort of unique situations at me and, up to some of my friends. That's a big draw for me as a player, so it definitely also influences the kind of games that I want to make.
From a coding standpoint, when you've got something like random generation of your levels, how hard is that sort of difficulty curve to get right?
It's more about how, for us, it's more about how the generator works and sort of how it's stitching levels together than anything else. So for us, we kind of internally have this is a little bit of a simplification of the way it really works. But all of the levels themselves are stitched together from individual chunks. And the chunks themselves are sort of semi-defined. They have some enemy placements, some hazard placements. Most of their basic platform placements will be the same every time that specific chunk is loaded. And the chunks themselves have difficulty ratings associated with them. So we know that early in the game, we're really only going to be throwing chunks that are relatively easy at you, and then the deeper you get into a run, the more often we're going to be pulling from the medium and eventually hard difficulty pieces. So from an algorithmic perspective, it's mostly just knowing which pool of building blocks to pull from as you build levels, which simplifies the process a bit for us.
Looking at 20XX on Steam, it's got very positive reviews, 92%. Nice. I'm going to take a little segue for a crazy question. Who writes those
Sure.
Steam system requirements?
I wrote them.
They're amazing. They're
Thank
great
you
for a
very
laugh.
much. They were fun.
Always good to put a little bit of humor in there.
Oh yeah, I take the parts of the job I think one should take seriously, and I tend to not really take seriously everything else. And so that includes, of course, things like Steam requirements, and a good bit of the writing in the game is very much just kind of my personal voice.
So when you see 20XX performing so well, what was going through your mind then to decide whether we should do a sequel or not? Was it always in the books or?
It's always been something that we sort of think about a little bit. It's always kind of been in the back of the mind, but it was never a hard decision, or a firm decision, I should say. Uh, it wasn't until we saw Glauber's availability and he and I had a chance to sort of sit down and workshop together for a couple of months, just a couple hours a week, kind of in our spare time, saying, hey, do we think this works? Do we think this is fun? Do we like, our working relationship? Like, do we think this is a good idea? So it wasn't really until then that the idea really solidified. But we've always known that there's so much more potential in sort of the framework we built. Even though we spent 5 years doing it, there's still so much more that we could do. It was our first commercial game as a studio, so there are a tremendous number of learnings that you can always iterate on the product, you can always improve the product, but it's you can't just go back and kind of fix everything you did from like a release planning and launch perspective. Like you can't go back and redo your marketing efforts and things like that. You can always try and really re-release a game, but I don't think we were anywhere to the point where that made sense.
Talking about the sort of release plan and stuff like that, you guys utilize Steam Early Access. How useful is that player feedback before hitting the big red go button?
Integral, I would say. It is critical. It is one of the most important things about the entire project for us. Every designer, every developer is going to treat this differently. For us, our kind of talent as designers is really more in here's a fun skeleton, here are a bunch of ideas and systems I think are fun. But we could really use sort of the deluge, the fire hose of player feedback to help us really polish and iterate over all of these thoughts we have, and sort of add in whatever new wonderful ideas come in from the community. I often say that in terms of design decisions made for 20XX during early access, a solid half of the decisions we made were based on player feedback or directly player suggestions. Our skill is very much in interacting with the folks who love our game and helping them help us make it better. So just absolutely critical. 20XX would be a million times worse if we hadn't gone into early access.
And can we expect 30XX to also be utilizing early access?
100%, yes. So we're hoping for early access sometime early next year. We don't know exactly when yet. We try to be in the business of only making promises that we can for sure keep. So there's no date there yet. But we'll probably be in early access for something like a year. We don't know exactly. We have a bunch of internal backlog tasks, an internal roadmap of sort of what do we think the distance between early access and 1.0 really is in terms of the work we already know we need to do, but we're very aware of the fact that as soon as we go into early access, we're going to discover a whole bunch of other work that we didn't know we needed to do yet, or that we didn't know would really benefit the game yet. And so we're sure that roadmap will change a lot. And so we don't know how long we'll be in early access. We're fortunate enough to be pretty financially stable here. We have the time we need to work on it until it's done. And there are no pressures on that other than, let's make sure we've got the right product by the time we say, here's early access, or by the time we say, hey, here's 1.0.
If you take a look, because there's been plenty of other games that attempt to do this sort of Mega Man inspired thing, and they don't always hit the mark. What do you think 20XX did that set it apart, that made it take off the way it did?
That's a really good question. I still think games that are heavily inspired by Mega Man X are pretty underexplored as a genre. I don't know that I would agree with the assertion that there are a whole bunch of games in the genre. But in terms of things we did right, I think it sort of comes down to kind of two cores. The first is that even when the game entered early access, so 20XX entered early access with zero momentum. We didn't even have a Steam Coming Soon page. We didn't build wish lists. We didn't know any better. We entered early access. It was like the week of or the week before Thanksgiving in 2014. And we sold a whopping 64 copies of 20XX on day one, and I was over the moon. I was super jazzed. I had never intended for the game to be a big commercial thing. I thought I was going to make a portfolio project so I could build my own C++ engine and then go work for Bethesda Softworks. So the fact that we released this thing and 64 people actually paid their own money to play it was super rad to me. But from the get-go, we had our sort of controls, and the core game feel of the game was really solid pretty much from day one. And so the art of the game needed a lot of improvement. I don't think a single asset survived between day one of early access and our actual 1.0 release, because it's the first game. We learned so much every time we built a set of assets that we'd get so much better and sort of want to really shape everything up and sort of do another iterative pass. And that happened a couple of times with some assets. So the first thing is the sort of core promise of the game, even though the game's content wasn't all there. The core promise of the game was kind of there from the get-go. If you saw it and you were like, yeah, this looks Mega Man-y, I want to pick this up and play this, it was probably going to live up to what you were hoping for. And so that the players that did sink into it really stuck with us. A lot of them, stuck around and hung out and continued to give us feedback. And the second thing is just our relationship with our community. The relationship we had with our fans, I know I'm sort of broken recording about this a little bit, but that relationship and our iteration on fan feedback and our constant updating of the game and regular pushes were all a huge part of sort of why we were able to continue to polish the game over time and make it great. So if I had to point to specific things that we did right, things that were specific to, what our studio did that made the game work, I would point to those two things.
And speaking of that community, if somebody wanted to get involved, I know there's a 30XX demo at the moment out for PAX Online, but is there websites, links, or places they can visit to get involved?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So the big ones are, if you want to sort of keep up to date on what's going on with 30XX, the best ways for you to do that are to follow me on Twitter. So that's twitter.com/batterystaple_G. You can join in with the Discord. It's discord.gg/20xx. It's 20xx because you're only allowed to have one vanity link per server, and we sort of share the community between 20 and 30xx because obviously there's a lot of demographic overlap there. You can also wishlist and follow the game on Steam. That also helps us a lot. And make sure that the moment the game's available in early access, you've got the first word on that. Other than that, website is batterystaplegames.com, but the principal places that's going to push you are the places I mentioned above. So follow us on Twitter, find the Discord, wishlist us on Steam. That'll be the best way for you to hear.
Sweet. And final question. The name of this podcast is Pizza Plus Coffee Equals Code, because I'm a software developer. It's my 9 to 5.
It's a good name.
Yep. Yeah. Because that's what drives me late at nights, chug the coffee, eat the pizza. What drives you late at night?
Yeah, I mean the coffee is a critical piece of it for me. I probably drink about one Red Bull every 2 months on the most dire of days when I, just the single cup or the second cup in the afternoon just isn't enough. One of the things I found, and this is me like just being or feeling old because I'm in my mid 30s at this point. When I eat a whole bunch of pizza, I become substantially less able to code. My stomach immediately says, "Sir, what are you doing? Sir, excuse me." Just sort of feels a big malaise overcome me. Yeah, for me, it's really, it's just, I don't know, I'm going to sound kind of tropey here, but keeping my ability to code, my motivation to work, all of that is just so much for me about kind of setting healthy life standards for myself. It's about making sure I get enough sleep. It's about making sure I'm not eating garbage 24/7. It's about making sure I get a decent amount of exercise. Other than those sort of basic life maintenance-y sort of things, the things that really keep me going, and it sounds a little maybe saccharine, but our relationship with the community is such a huge part of it. Every time I have somebody write me on Twitter that says like, "Oh my gosh, I love your game. This is the favorite thing I've played all year," just knowing that we're actually doing this for somebody, that there are people on the other end that are like legitimately benefiting. You could sort of debate all day, how useful entertainers are to society relative to, people who do actual good. But I like to think there's some positive societal value there. And so those reaffirmations of that definitely keep me going.
Just bottle that up and put it in a can and start selling it.
Right.
Thanks a lot for taking time out of your day to have a chat.
Yeah, of course. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Yes. And good luck with 30XX.
Yeah, we've hopefully not got too far to go into early access here. So obviously you can play the demo now during PAX Online, and hopefully will be purchasable in a more complete form in not too many months.